Let me just start off by saying I'm grateful to Allah for being here. I'm also very grateful for MSA being so generous to invite me and also for all of you to show up at this event to hear what we have to say. I was given this topic yesterday by Sister Mina, so I'm very excited about the subject matter, which is, to simplify, I guess, utilizing our voice as well as not allowing anyone to strip or silence this voice as long as we have it. Before beginning, let me just say, before getting into the topic, or actually part of the topic, that I believe in what Allah says in the Quran when He says that He created everything in stages. And, you know, oftentimes when we think of this ayah, when this ayah is thought of, we think about the universe, we think about creation, we think about human development. And we oftentimes think about it also in the sense of improvement. You know, Allah also says in the Quran, He says that this universe is constantly expanding. So expansion is something you think about improvement. But improvement, just like success, I don't think is ever linear. It comes with the ebbs and flows. You know, there's a verse in Quran where Allah speaks about, says, man will can attain to the highest of highs, or he can debase himself to the lowest of low. You know, also Allah mentions that He's giving you everything in the samawat and the ard for you to sakhara, right? Everything in the heavens and the earth for you to utilize. But if you fail to utilize it, He also tells us in another ayah, He says that corruption will appear on land and sea as a result of what men's hands have done. So as we look at that verse, or those verses, and Allah is talking about how everything He created in stages, and we look at it in terms sometimes of improvement, also kufr, rejecting Allah's truth and His guidelines. Also, there are stages to that. I was talking to an imam a while back, and he mentioned that there's a thing called creeping kufr, right? How kufr, this denial of Allah, tends to creep upon you slowly. And it's like being injected, in a sense, with poison, and this poison has been made to taste well. Like Allah says in the Quran, the shaitan wants what's bad seeming good to you and what's good seeming bad to you. And before you know it, if we're not careful, if we're not vigilant, if we're not guarding against, you know, these foreign elements, these foreign ideas, we're in full-blown kufr before we know it. You know, there was an imam that he made the dua. He said, may Allah preserve us from diseases that causes no pain. For diseases that cause pain influence us to seek out a cure. Diseases without pain goes unfelt. So therefore, about time you realize it, it's too late, right, to do anything about it. And I say that because when you think about ideas, I think are one of the most powerful things that exist, because ideas influence the way we see ourselves, they influence the way we see the world around us. And they also form policies, social policies, political policies, military policies, economic policies that govern the way we behave toward one another. And as the saying goes, that he that controls information, he that controls ideas, right, control the meanings and the messages that are explicitly or implicitly implied in those ideas. So you can never divorce ideas or an ideology from institutions of power. There's a power component when you think about ideas. And so I'm saying that because there seems to be a line of thought, and I haven't looked into it in depth, but there seems to be a line of thought, for example, that the world we're living in is an illusion. Like the mountains we see, they're not really mountains. The car that I'm driving is not really a car. The body that I have is not really a body. These are atoms and cells and molecules, whatever the body is comprised of. And this is just an illusion. And I think ideas like this are dangerous, because what it does, it eventually erodes and devalues existence. You know, it's like watching television. And the more you watch television, and the more you see death, and you see mayhem and destruction, there's this sense that you become desensitized to killing. It no longer has the effect. So these type of ideas, when you begin to look at life as an illusion, right, it begins to erode away or devalue existence. And I was thinking about this earlier. So when we hear about the killing of black people or brown people or Muslim women, men, and children, right, it doesn't necessarily have the effect that it's supposed to have, because, okay, this life that you're claiming to take is not really a life. It's an illusion. And this is a life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, right? He says that we should view as sacrosanct. He says if you take one life unjustly, it's as though you've killed all of humanity. And I think the worst part of taking a life is not just the physical taking of a life. I think the worst part in taking a life is when we take the mind of a person. You know, I grew up in Mississippi, right? I grew up in the South. And when I grew up in a family where my mother had the equivalent of an 8th grade education. So I had an inferiority complex early because I didn't grow up in a family where we were taught critical thinking skills. We were taught how to problem solve. And I felt that the only option I had to succeed was to play basketball. As a 9 and 10 years old, that if I didn't make it in professional basketball, my life is over. And I'm going to zoom through a lot of these details because I want to talk less about my life, so to speak. But growing up in that environment, I go through junior high school, right? And I memorized my way through school. Never really learned anything. And your environment has a way of molding and shaping who you become, how you see yourself, how you see the world around you. And I remember being in junior high and they called my mother to the office. And when they called to the office, I had no idea. And I'm sitting there and I'm already struggling with my identity. I grew up without a father. I grew up poor. I grew up uneducated. I grew up with Tourette's syndrome, a neurological disorder. Right? I grew up in the ghetto. I'm dealing with all of this. I'm searching. And here I'm sitting in front of this guy telling my mother we have to put your son in a special education class. I was devastated. I said, please don't let him do this, Mom. Right? It just takes me a long time to get it done because Tourette's syndrome is like that. If it doesn't feel perfect, you have to continue to do it until your mind and your body's on the same page. So it may take me 10, 15, 20 minutes just to read a page sometimes because everything is not there. It doesn't come off my lips correctly. It doesn't come off my mind correctly. I can't comprehend it. So they end up putting me in that class. I go to LSU. I'm breaking all type of records. Well, before going to LSU, they put me in a class to figure out which classes to put me in. They had me reading something. And I remember like yesterday, I was humiliated. And I'm reading, and they say to me, it said, what does this mean? I said, I don't know. They said, can you recall the story back? I said, I can't. I couldn't put it in context. I could read, I could spell, but my comprehension skills were terrible. So they ended up putting me in a remedial reading class. A lot of people didn't know this. So I'm going through all of that. While I'm at LSU, Dale Brown gives me a book that would change my life forever, which is the autobiography of Malcolm. As I began to read his story, I never heard of Malcolm up to that point. As I began to read his story, I noticed right away, I said, man, this man has qualities that I don't have, that I'm desperate for. Because I grew up I was born in '69, but I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And growing up in that environment, like I said, your environment, your parents, the people that you're around, the information you're receiving, it has a way, I don't care how strong you are, who you are, it will mold and shape you. So I'm reading this book, and I said, man, this man is articulate. He doesn't seem to care what people think. Right? He's courageous. He's sincere. I say, man, I need that. Because when I was growing up, I would look and observe how the whites and blacks would interact with each other. And oftentimes, religiously, when you would see my parents or people that I know, they would have to confront a white person. It could be something that they saw that was unjust, that they didn't like. It was this downward stare, real submissive, servant-like, like they were fearful to communicate their views. But in private, boy, they would curse them out. That mother, blah, 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 blah. Right? And I saw myself as a young man growing up with these tendencies. And I knew at a young age, I said, man, I don't like the way this feels. This ain't natural. I don't want this for myself. But I didn't necessarily know how to go about it. So I'm reading his book. Now I'm going into my second year at LSU. And I was identifying at that time as a Christian. I had a lot of questions about the faith. So after reading his book, I go to dinner. I'm zipping through details to get to something. I end up being drafted the first round, third pick to the Denver Nuggets. While there, I meet a brother. We became close. Islam came up in conversation. I said, you interested in Islam? He said, yeah, you? I said, man, I've been reading Malcolm. I said, of course. He said, I met this Muslim brother. Said, we can go to the masjid on Evans Street and pick up the Quran. Got in the car, took off. I was excited. Never saw the Quran a day in my life. Went, picked up the Quran, came back home. Remember like yesterday. It was 2 or 3 pages. I don't remember the area that I read, but I remember like yesterday how it made me feel. And I turned the page, and I turned another page. I look across the room, and I said, bro, I don't know about you, but my search is over. I'm going to be a Muslim. So I began to go to the masjid. Going to the masjid, you come across brothers. And I ended up talking to this brother who was a janitor for a while. He would school me on the teachings of Islam. After my first year in the MBA that summer, I ended up going to the masjid to take my shahada publicly. After which I go into the office, and I remember the imam saying to me, have you chosen a name? I said, no, the only names I know is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad. He said, well, I think Mahmoud would be a good name for you. He said, I think, the other brother was in the room. He said, I think Abdul-Rauf would be a good name for you. I said, alhamdulillah. I heard all the names have beautiful meanings. So as time went on, I'm not good with names. I see these brothers, people keep referring to them. And it dawns on me, the brother that gave me the name Mahmoud and the brother that gave me the name Abdul-Rauf, that was their names. It had nothing to do with my character. I'm thinking, you know, I see you exemplify Mahmoud. And then I got a little pissed off because right after, they gave me a book of Muslim names. They should have gave me that first. And then I'm reading these names and I'm coming across stuff like Suleiman, Salahuddin, Mujahid. I'm like, man, striver for truth, Mujahid. I could have been Mujahid. But it was too late. They knew me as Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. But what was interesting was this. As I began, as a public figure, you're out there, people assume to know you. Every city I went to, and I'm indebted to these brothers to the day I die. Every city I went to, there were Muslims. You know how we can be as Muslims when we see each other, right? I'm checking into the hotel. Assalamu alaikum, ma! Loud, aggressive. You turn around, hey, assalamu alaikum, brother, what's happening? Every city, man, you know, some of us talk fast. Assalamu alaikum, you know, my name's Brother Hashim Lauddin, man, alhamdulillah. You know, I'm just came in, there's a masjid up the street. You need to go to the masjid, alhamdulillah. Take it, man, got some halal food, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So every city I went to, it became a tradition that we would go to the hotel room and we would order room service. And we may stay up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning just talking about issues. Talking about politics, talking about history, you name it. And it's amazing because you hear different insights and perspectives that people have. Also, what happens, I was talking to a brother about this earlier, that you're able to get a book list that you probably would have never gotten if you were looking for books yourself. Like, hey man, what do you read? You know, what do you read? And so you start developing a library. And there was this bookstore on Colfax called Salam Books that this Muslim owned. And every day after practice, I would find myself, because at this time now I was thirsty for knowledge. Because I'm thinking about how I grew up. I'm thinking about breaking those handcuffs that I've allowed to be placed on me and that I've placed on myself. Right? Seeing things and hearing things that didn't make sense that I wanted to say something and do something about, but was fearful to do something. And I knew that I had to begin to make steps to head in that direction. So I would go after practice every day, and I would sit with this brother. And he had books, literally, political science, history, religion. He had so many, Behold a Pale Horse, all type of books. And I would sit there daily, man, and I literally bought everything he had, and I would sit and we would just talk. The beautiful thing about reading, the sister Amina asked me earlier, right? The beautiful thing about reading, in terms of making, I think you asked me about what caused you to make a decision that you made. And I said reading. Is that the more you read, at some point you're going to want to share it. As you begin to share this information, you're going to realize that a lot of people think just like you. The difference, not everybody's willing to make it public, right? And at some point, if you're fortunate, the more you read, you're going to develop more confidence. And you're going to become like what Allah says in the Quran, don't be like a donkey with books on his back. You got all this information and you're not putting it to use. Now you got to do something with it. So now I'm coming across authors that I never heard before in my life. Noam Chomsky, Gore Vidal, Randall Robinson, Kwanzaa Kunjufu, Neil Postman, right? Amos Wilson. And I'm thirsty. And I don't want to just have information in my head, but I'm trying to learn something now so that I can not only share, but that I can apply. Because I'm not satisfied with the life that I was living. And I made a commitment to myself. I said, you know what? I want to live and die with a free conscience and a free soul, whether people like it or not. This was the mission, right? This was the mission that I was on as a young man. But there was one book for me that teed me off. Even though I was reading the Quran, and you come across where Allah says in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawwamin bil qist shuhada lillah. Oh, you are secure in your commitment to Allah. Be ever steadfast in upholding justice, bearing witness to the truth for the sake of Allah. You come across verses in the Quran where Allah speaks about He didn't put in the human heart or the human being two hearts. You can't be for justice and injustice. You come across information in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, right, in which the Quraysh was a superpower at the time. And they wanted the Prophet to gesture with his finger to recognize the system and how corrupt it was with just his finger. And he wouldn't even do it. But here I was at full attention, right? So I'm looking at all this, but there was one book for me that did it. I don't know, have anyone ever heard of the Prince of Slaves? Okay. For those who haven't, just briefly, there was a king in Timbuktu. He had a son named Abdul-Rahman who was a prince. This son was captured, taken to Natchez, Mississippi, and enslaved. Natchez, Mississippi was 2.5 hours from me. I'm from Gulfport, Mississippi. When I was reading that, then it takes you to Timbuktu, and you start reading about the civilizations that it had, the legal systems, the universities, and at one time, books was the major commodity. More than natural resources, books was the #1 commodity. They valued learning. It pissed me off because here it is, now I'm starting to replay my life as a young man. I'm starting to look at how I viewed myself, right? How I could only see myself as being a basketball player. I looked at myself as being inadequate. I viewed myself as being inferior when it came to academics. I didn't know that I had a better chance statistically at becoming an engineer or a doctor than a basketball player. So I put all of my marbles, all of my life in this one thing. It's a blessing and a curse. Could be, because all it takes is one injury and your career is over. So I'm reading this book and I'm coming across this. But as I'm going through my life, I can remember they're the #1 team in the SEC. I'm a freshman. The end of the game, I have 53. They're shaking me. Go outside, they want to do an interview with you. I come out the arena. As soon as I turn the corner, they see my body. They're still in the stands. Nobody had left. It's full to capacity. They give me a standing ovation. We just beat them. I go and do an interview, which seems like 100 journalists. Now I'm on the bus. I'm on the bus looking out the window and I'm crying like somebody had killed my mama. Why am I crying? And I'm crying like literally because I'm scared. I'm like, you know what? This don't happen to people like me. Something's going to happen. I'm going to die. I'm going to get hit by a train. I'm going to get hit by a car. The plane going to crash. That day, literally, it was storming outside. Planes usually do this. It was doing this. It was going crazy. People, you had fools on the plane, literally. I call them fools because they thought it was a roller coaster ride. I said, man, shut up. Literally, I was mad because they don't know my thought process. Here it is. You don't know that I'm on this bus crying, thinking I'm going to die on a plane crash. And here we are. The plane is doing what it's doing. We ended up landing in Baton Rouge. I was this close. Going to Coach Brown and saying, you know, I want to be in the NBA. I want to take care of my family. I want to help people. But I'm wondering if I can just play home games. I don't want to fly no more. But I knew he wouldn't take it. He wouldn't go for it. Right? So sometimes I get amnesia. And I'm going to test you to see where I was. What was the last thing I just said? So here it is. I know what I said. I'm just seeing what you said. So here it is. That's one of my tricks when you lose your play. So here it is. I'm crying. I'm analyzing my life. And what made me mad was the fact that when I read that book and I'm going through this stuff, and I said your environment has a way of molding and shaping who you become, right? How you see yourself and how you view yourself. No wonder when I was I start thinking about movies. You know, when I say I'm looking at my life, right after reading that book and how I was viewing myself, I started thinking about shows that I would watch. How many of you ever heard of Good Times in Sanford and Son? Don't tell me you haven't heard of it. All right. For those who haven't heard of it, Good Times is about a family living in the projects. Right? And they're trying to get out of the projects. And James and JJ, the whole family, Thelma, it's like every time it seemed that they were about to make it out, something would kick them right back in the projects. And as a little boy, you're watching this daily because them making it, that's like you making it. You're in the same environment. You want them to make it, you rooting for them. And so it seemed like, man, and something kicks them right back in every time. Sanford and Son. I didn't gamble, and I don't gamble now. But I was praying that Fred and Lamont would win some money at the casino so they can get out the junkyard. It seemed like every time they were about to make it, something would kick them right back in the junkyard. Right? And what this does to a little boy, you keep getting hyped, and then there's a letdown. I got mad because I could never truly embrace. I'm saying, why can't I embrace success? Why can't I see myself as being worthy of being successful without thinking something is going to happen to me? It's because all of these images and this information that society is telling you about yourself. You know what? Some of y'all, a few of y'all going to make it out the cracks. But most of y'all going to end up like JJ and James. Most of y'all going to end up like Fred and Lamont. That's what angered me. And at that moment I realized, I said, you know what? I'm not playing this game no more. I got to change this. I got to change who I am. I don't want to die like this. So I really began to read. I began to come across stuff. And in coming across those things for me, I'm reading what Noam Chomsky is talking about imperialism. And like I said before, I'm thinking about what Allah is saying in the Quran about our social responsibility, right? To each other, to ourselves, and to Allah. And I'm looking at this symbol that isn't representing what it says it's supposed to represent. And I say, I just can't do it. I can't stand. And I remember after taking that position, it was about 4 or 5 months, because I was still searching. Somebody got wind of it. The assistant GM comes to me, he says, somebody wants to do an interview with you. Do you mind talking? I said, look, I don't mind. These are conversations that we have on the bus, on the plane. We talk about it all the time. As I said before, the difference is we don't always make it public. So now I'm like, look, man, I'm on a new mission now. This is what I'm saying to myself. This ain't about getting brownie points, you know, getting pats on the back. I don't want to die. My greatest fear is not death. It's dying and knowing that I could have said something about something that was wrong or did something and I didn't do it. And now I don't have a chance to make up for it. That's my greatest fear. It's like figuratively, if Allah's questioning me, what you got for me, Mahmoud? I want my answer to be, Allah, I don't have nothing left. I'll use everything you gave me on this earth. I used it. This is the way. You know, so I'm on, this is my thought process. So I'm seeing this emblem, and I couldn't stand. So they do an interview with me. And I spoke my conscience. So here it is, we're in shoot-around the next day. I've never seen that many reporters at shoot-around. Usually they like to warm you up before you talk. But this particular day they sat down and they asked me the question, what do you think about the American flag? And I spoke my conscience. I said, listen, I think it's a symbol, and it was a longer interview, but to sum it up, I think it's a symbol of tyranny and oppression. But am I saying everything in America is bad? No, there's good that exists. But as a Muslim, wherever the bad is, even if it's in Saudi Arabia, we don't stand for it. But the media, they focus on tyranny and oppression. They try to assassinate my character, this is a troublemaker, all of those type of things. This is the angle that they did. The next day, I come to the arena to play Shaquille O'Neal with the Orlando Magic. Trainer tells me to go down the hallway. Bernie wants to see you. The GM. I go down to the hall. He says the NBA want to find you and suspend you if you don't stand. I say I can't do it. So he put 2 people on the phone. And when they were on the phone, eventually they were trying to convince me. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And they were telling me a story. And in the midst of the story, they identified themselves as Jewish. They said, for example, we're Jewish. And I can't remember the story. But as they're telling me the story, I listened. I was polite. And I was respectful. I said, thank you for telling me the story. I really appreciate it. I said, but there's only one problem. I'm not Jewish, and that story doesn't apply to me. I said, so do what you will. I'm not standing. So I'm green. I'm thinking it's going to take 2 weeks for the suspension to go in place. I said, well, can I go get dressed? He said, no. He said, you're suspended. I said, now? It's okay. So I said, can I put my clothes on and go and support the team in the stands? He said, no, they don't want you on the premises. It's okay. So as I'm driving home, before I even get home, it's global. It's all over the place. Right? This black who happened to be Muslim, who do he think he is for taking this position? Right? And so my career after that began to go down. My mindset had totally changed. From that little naive boy growing up that saw things that didn't make sense or that saw things that he knew was wrong and couldn't say anything about them, now to say, look, man, the truth means more to me than anything. Allah's Ar-Razaq. He's the best to provide. And that's what I was rolling with. Just like when Allah talks about that bird, when he flies off, he knows with certainty that when he's going to come back with the sustenance that he needs. Right? So I said, you know what, hey, man, it's going to be what it's going to be. And so what happened, fast forwarding, I ended up going overseas. I come back. I'm on a mission now. I'm trying to change. Now, this is my mission. It might not be your mission. We all are tested differently. You have to decide the road you're going to take and how you're going to take it. And be comfortable with that. But here it is. I'm coming back. I ended up, one of my Muslim brothers pulled the Don King move. You know, told him, hyped up the story that I was doing a great job playing against NBA players in the summer. So they brought me into Vancouver after not being in the NBA for some years. They asked me, how you going to deal with the flag? I said, the same way I dealt with it before I left. So they brought me on the team. I had a two-year deal, the second year their option. First year I'm playing, I told them if I come back, if I get in the shape I'm supposed to be in, guarantee me time. I did that, but they still wouldn't play me. One of my teammates told me, Michael Dickerson, he said, Mahmoud, do you know that out of all the people in the NBA, you're averaging more points per minute, even than Michael Jordan? When you get in the game, you average a point a minute, but they won't put you in the game. Made me furious. So they wanted to put me on the injured list. I said, no. We had a 41-minute conversation. Make a long story short, I ended up getting on the injured list. What happened that next year would behead my career for good. 9/11 took place. Now you're dealing with a person that I grew up most of my life seeing black folks not being able to confront confront people when they saw something that was wrong. And I said, man, I can't live that way. I just refuse to. I know it's going to be difficult. I know it's going to be challenges. But I refuse to. So, what was the last thing I just said? No, before that. Huh? Alhamdulillah. Amen. 9/11. So, there's a guy named Bernard Goldberg with Sports Talk, Brian Gumbel on HBO. He came to do an interview with me in Mississippi. This is going into the option of my second year, their option. I could have chose not to speak and probably still been on the Vancouver Grizzlies. But I couldn't, it's something in me I just couldn't. If I felt that there was something I could say and I had to say, you're not going to stop me from saying it. If it's something that I'm not ready to say, you're not going to rush me to say it. So they called me at the right time. And there was this guy, and normally what they do when they do interviews with you, they have a guy calling, he'll interview you, then he'll call the big man in charge to tell him, hey, he said this, he said that. I think it'll be a good interview. But I've been through enough of them at this point to know that I'm going to give you what I want you to have. I ain't giving you everything. So when he came to Mississippi, somebody had just burnt my house down. I got a call from the sister in the community, turn on the news. It was 4 o'clock. I'm looking at the house burning down. There's a documentary by the Dawn's Early Light, Zarina Grewald did. At the end, when you're looking at when it's all over, when you're looking at the credits going, you'll see the house burning down on the documentary. But he came down to do an interview about 9/11, about the house, about the flag. He sits me down in the masjid. The first question he asked me, he looks at me. And I knew prior to that, just the way his face was, I said, he's coming on a mission to sabotage. And I'm not in the mood to play games. So whatever he asks me, I'm going to give him what I got and let the chips fall where they may. Because Allah is my God. So he sits down, he looks at me, he says, so, not asking me about my family, not trying to warm it up. He says, so do you think bin Laden did it? And I chuckled. And my answer was no. I said, but, and I paused, but if he did it, he wasn't alone. He had help. So I started giving him things because the night before I started going through a lot of the information in other magazines and newspapers that are not mainstream. The Spotlight at the time, now called American Free Press. I was reading the Socialist Review. I'm reading the Washington Report on Middle Eastern Affairs. I'm reading the Crescent International. These are things that CNN and New York Times, they're not going to necessarily report. So I started giving him things that he gets, but they're not reporting. And I say to him, I said, well, there were $10 billion traded the Monday before the event. Same airlines that crashed. I said, don't you think the public should know that? Don't you think that they should be privy to that information so they can decide, instead of you trying to brand Muslims as the culprit, right? That they're responsible for all this. Don't you think that they should have that information? I said, right, starting with Iraq, ending with Iran, to basically wipe out the Middle East, which is what we know as the war on terror in the Muslim world. Reads like a book. I said, don't you think this is something that the public should have access to so that they can decide? I said, Ariel Sharon was supposed to visit America. He was advised not to come to America that day. Who advised him? Did they have information that was critical? Did they know something we don't know? Don't you think they should have that? I said, there were 9 individuals on the other side of Manhattan. He was furious at this time. That were filming the incident. They were already there filming the incident. They were deported back to Israel. 5 of them being a part of the Mossad, CIA. Don't you think this is something? Where you getting your information from? He stopped the interview 3 times, went out there and cursed his guy out. You could see it vividly. You told me he was going to say. I did tell him that, but I ain't tell him this. Right? I'm not giving you everything. He said, where you getting your information from? He thought I was going to say Muslim publications so he can tell me, oh, this is biased. When I said, well, the Washington Report on Middle Eastern Affairs, American Free Press, Social, he couldn't say anything. So he kept jumping from subject to subject. So after that interview is what beheaded my career. But again, I was cool. It's okay. Because for me, I've reached a point in my life, I'm not always going to be eloquent, I'm not always going to be articulate, I'm not always going to have the right answers. But one thing Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf going to do before he die, he's going to always strive to live and die with a free conscience and a free soul, whether you like it or not. And if I got something to say, I'm going to say it. Right? And if there's something I want to do, I'm going to do it. I began to read, and I don't know if you've heard, and these are things for me that as a Muslim, you know, Allah says, or Islam teaches us that knowledge is the lost property of the believer, the wise man. Wherever you find it, keep it. And I'm always trying to draw inspiration from life. You know, Arundhati Roy said something that sticks with me daily. When I wake up, there are things that hype us up, like keep us motivated, right? Keep us grounded. She says something, once you see something, you can't unsee it. To be silent, to say nothing, is just as political and active speaking out. Either way, you're accountable. I said, wow. So my being silent, is just as political. I might as well go for broke. Let it all hang out. George Washington Carver, no one has the right to come into this world and go out of it without leaving behind distinct and legitimate reasons for having passed through it. That's well asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Right? Who are we to waste what Allah has given us? Our mission should be to leave a legacy of justice, of truth in everything we do. I'm thinking about people like Huey P. Newton. He's talking about revolutionary suicide, giving your life for a cause. He said it doesn't mean that we have a death wish. Everybody wants to live, right? He said it doesn't mean we have a death wish. He said, but what it means is we have such a strong desire to live in peace and with dignity that the existence without it is impossible. I'm like, wow. This is something to aspire to. This is for me what I wake up to and I'm thinking about constantly. And I also think about people like, I don't know if you've heard of the guy, Jürgen, I think his name, Habermas, maybe, right? He coined the phrase, because we live in this type of society now, right? We were in New York and we were talking about this. We're in a society now where it's like people have become so sensitive to the truth. Literally. You have universities. I think they have trigger points. If a speaker comes and they're controversial, they say something that you don't like, they have safe spaces, maybe coloring books and stuffed animals so you can escape. Literally. This is sad. It reminds me of what Trevor Noah said. He said it the best. He said we live in a society that's more offended being called a racist than actually being one. How dare you call me a racist? He said, how dare you be one? I mean, literally, it's sad. It's like you can't even, you hear this, it's like this phrase that I hate to hear, don't judge me. Oh, I hate it. We're all being judged. Allah says, judge by what Allah has established. If you lie to me or if you steal from me, I got a right to call you a thief. But it's like we're being conditioned that what I see is not what I'm seeing. I'm not supposed to say anything about it. This is sad. This is the condition. And it's deeper. When we talk about those who control information, it is deeper when you think about it. And I'm sitting here, we can't even discuss. It's like if you mention something about, I disagree. I had a sister one time that told me, what do you think about same-sex marriage, homosexuality? I said, I disagree with it. I don't believe in it. She said, well, if I invite two sisters that are in a relationship, her word was lesbians, I'm not going to mince my words. Would you come? I said, let me ask you a question. If I came, if I engaged them in dialogue, would you mind? No, well, you can't come. I said, you can't have it both ways. You can't be expressing this, showing this publicly, but not want to converse about it and deal with it. That's hypocritical. It's like, because I say I disagree with that, I'm not saying that this person is void of all good. I don't agree with pornography. I don't agree with drug addiction. But I'm not saying that the person that does it is all, that everything about them I disagree with. I'm not saying that they're not intelligent. I'm not saying that they don't give in charity. I'm not saying that they don't have goodness in them. I disagree with that. Why is it that because you disagree, it's almost like you are anti-Semitic on the subject? The equivalent of what an anti-Semite would be. Like you become anti-human. Literally, this is the environment that we're in dealing with this. We've become like we prefer a lie because it soothes our conscience. It makes us feel good over the truth. And this is something I think that we have to get beyond. I was reading something the other day, and I'm going to end on this. There's an article in the Washington Report on Middle Eastern Affairs because colleges are being attacked in this regard, very much so, with these ideas. And I was just reading this the other day. I said, man, this is powerful. I don't know if you ever heard of the AIPAC Jewish lobby, right? They've been pushing for years, every president, right? They have laws on the book that they're pushing that if you end up criticizing, in particular colleges, if you criticize the state of Israel, colleges will be denied funding. That government and officials, if you end up mentioning something about their nuclear capability, and I forget the name of the law that they're trying to pass, that it could be up to $1 million fine or 20 years or 20 years in prison. Everything has a beginning. There are stages, right? We think about how long it took for prayer and the mention of God to be out of school, for this concept to be accepted. It don't happen overnight. All of what we're going through now, this trying to silence dissent and what people feel and standing up for issues, what it seems like, there's a bigger agenda that's leading toward this criticizing or not criticizing the state of Israel. And it's being pushed aggressively by AIPAC. It's bigger than what we think was happening. And I can't cover everything right now, but when it's all said and done, as human beings, as people of conscience, as Muslims, whoever you are, we should never allow our voices to be silenced while we have access to those voices. Prayer alone won't do it. It's always a combination. Frederick Douglass said, I prayed for freedom for 20 years and never received an answer until I started praying with my legs. It's a combination of the two. We got to communicate and we got to move. There's an imam. Out of all the imams, he would have the shortest prayer. And they asked him one day, they said, well, out of all the imams, your prayer is the shortest. I'll never forget this and I hope I never will. He said, because the prayer begins when it ends. I said, wow. If we look at our prayer daily, it's minutes. But outside of the ritual, with business people, with fathers, with mothers, with educators, he's saying, I'm trying to get to the meat of the prayer, which is action, being involved. So I think really as people of conscience, we have to be mindful of Allah's in control. Literally, we got to put our trust in Allah, and we have to begin to communicate. He's given us a book that has an antidote for everything, but we don't really trust it. I'm not saying individually, I'm saying as a group, we don't really trust it like that. If we believe that, every issue that's out there, we should be involved in the conversation, but we run away from it because we don't want to be condemned. Right? You got to take a position. And taking a position meaning somebody's not going to like you. If you die and everybody like you, atheists come to your funeral, they're praising you. Jews come to your funeral, they're praising you. Christians of every denomination are praising you. Muslims of every madhab is praising you. You didn't stand for nothing. You like what Allah said, you on the fence. You trying to please everybody. Taking a position means somebody's not going to like you. And I pray to Allah that we at some point take a position and that we grow as a community and as a ummah as a result of that. Please forgive me if there's anything I said that I shouldn't have said. I overstepped my bounds with time. All praise belongs to Allah for everything else. Assalamu alaikum.